Um, Good morning and welcome members to this first meeting of 2022. This is being live streamed, and can I remind members to use their microphones when wishing to speak and turn off again to activate the cameras. Item 1 is the minutes of the previous meeting, and I would note that Mr. David Fowler was omitted from those present and will be picked up in the minutes. Subject to the above, are members happy to agree the minutes that can be found on pages 4 to 13 of the agenda pack? Can I have a show of hands? Duly approved. Thank you very much. Item 2, I don't believe there are any actions arising from those minutes. Item 3, Julie, could we have any apologies? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I have just one apology from Councillor Bill Borrett.
Thank you. Which I didn't work out, that's why I'm in the chair. I'm not aware of any urgent business. Can I ask members if they have any declaration of interests? There are none. Non-members wishing to address the meeting, welcome, Tim. I think you're nearly as more regular member than some, but all inputs are valid. Thank you. Are there, item 7, are there any training issues or requirements? Alison, are you aware of anything? Okay. So we move then on to item 8, Q4 strategic risk report. Mark Robinson is to present this report, and that can be found on pages 14 to 36 of your agenda pack.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm pleased to bring the Q3 risk report to the committee today. Ryan will go into more detail on specific risks, but there are a couple of elements that I want to highlight first. Colleagues will firstly note the new risk which has been added to the strategic risk register. This risk relates to the monitoring of strategic contracts, and their impact on our ability to deliver our corporate plan. Their inclusion is now not related to any specific issue or risk, but has been suggested as best practice. As colleagues will see, this is a low risk to the council due to the systems and processes we currently have in place. You will also see we currently have 4 high risks on the register in relation to cyber security, waste consultation, and emerging government policy. These risks have not progressed that much since we last brought this paper to the committee, but the latest notes section does provide an update for members. I'll now hand over to Ryan, who will cover off some specifics.
Thank you, Councillor. Just a few areas to pick up from my end. So one is the cyber and the GDPR risk. Ultimately, that's still under investigation, so we haven't been able to progress that risk forward. I'm hopeful that when we bring this back in Q1, we can give more information on that. The other one is just on the HGV risk, which members will see is now at target. My proposal around that is that whilst it is at target, we probably want to keep it until Q1 and then bring it to this committee to agree to remove it. It probably isn't meeting the criteria of strategic risk between now and Q1, just because we're seeing those levels drop. And my last bit I just like to make the committee aware of is you'll see some of the target dates are for the 1st of April. What we'll be doing with those that haven't met target is reviewing them and ensuring they still meet the threshold and criteria for a strategic risk. The reason for that with some of those you'll see, like cybersecurity, like the sustainability strategy, is they will ultimately still meet the threshold for a strategic risk, but we set an annual target date, so we review it at that time as to whether we carry on with it at a strategic level. I'm ultimately happy to take any questions from the committee if they've got any.
Thank you, Ryan. Councillor Linda Monument.
Could I ask you just to look at the ICT critical breach risk and confirm what the actual current score is? Because it's placed on the chart as 4x4. Previous score was 4x4. In both cases, though, it's listed as a 12. I think we need that. Sorry, we need that to say 16. And I think that may happen somewhere else. If I find it, I'll tell you. Thank you.
Yeah, so just to confirm, that risk is a 16, it is a impact of a 4 and a likelihood of 4.
Ryan, on that subject, the answer to the satisfaction of that risk may not be suitable for reporting in public. How will we deal with that?
So that's something which we can discuss as to whether it becomes below the line or not, as to what we would discuss in this committee. I'd need to talk to ICT and the executive director for that area to work out how we deal with that. But ultimately, we'll wait for the conclusion of the investigation before we're able to decide how we're going to report that. But we will be seeking to report something to this committee.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Harry?
Thank you very much, Chairman. Can everybody hear me okay? Good, thank you. Yeah, I've just got a couple of questions. This is on the increased demand on housing services. 2 questions there. One is potential consequences, and the first line refers to affordable temporary housing options. And also the second line then refers to a shortfall in available longer term housing. I assume that means longer term as opposed to temporary. What I would suggest, I'm sure that the senior management team do this already, it might well be helpful to link the register there, feed in to both anything that's happening with Bretland Bridge, but also in terms of the you know, the local plan, because we do know that there is increasing demand and shortage, as I think members will know from their sort of caseload, in terms of both temporary, but also we have longer term solutions. That's actually going to, you know, actually be saving us money, as well as not placing people out of areas. So that's just something to keep on board. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your comments, Councillor. I'll pass that on. I agree with what you say there. I think the housing risk itself, we potentially do need to look at reframing at some point over the next few quarters, just because this deals very specifically with the legislative impact on demand. We perhaps need to look at the wider impact moving forward, but I'll take your comments on board and I'll pass those on.
On that subject, presumably when the Elm House development is complete, we will be able to satisfy some of that risk.
Yeah, so Elm House is on there under the action plan in terms of what we're doing to mitigate that risk. So once that action plan is fulfilled, we should see that risk lower. Elm House is obviously part of that, and I hope that from the impact that we can see the risk be lowered.
Councillor Burt.
Thank you, Chairman. Got 3 queries on the actual RAGs themselves, and then a more general one. So shall I just drop those 3 in to start with?
Yeah, if we have your 3 and then get those commented on.
Again, I think this has already been started. We started looking at this on page 18 on housing demand. I'm surprised that we haven't elevated the likelihood aspect of this RAG, because we can see significant pressures imminently on low income people with inflation and national insurance tax increases. I'm just wondering, have they been factored into account in terms of the likely demand on this service? So the second one is on the sustainability strategy on page 22. We are due to have an annual update following the original Inomia report. That was more than a year ago, so we're kind of overdue a report, and that seems not likely to happen until autumn. So I just wondered what sort of slippage would be required to change the RAG rating. It's been sat right slap bang in the middle of the grid since we started that one, but some guidance as to when we need to start getting concerned on that would be useful. And on page 25, the failure to deliver the local plan, the description on that only makes reference to reputational damage. And I feel surely that the risk extends well beyond reputational damage, in that we could end up, failure to deliver a local plan means that we could end up with unplanned development or development in the wrong places, without the desired infrastructure. So can I query about actually the range of which that RAG actually covers?
So just deal with those one by one. So housing, that risk originally got reintroduced and raised as a result of COVID impacts on the number of people we're seeing in the service. So that has been raised subsequently based on those factors you talk about. Sustainability strategy, ultimately, we have till 2035. That is the target date we have in it. Obviously, the risk is around that slipping. That's one of those ones which we sort of review annually. In terms of those wider reports, I can't really comment on that. That'd be something I'd have to check with Greg in terms of what's happening with those. And on the local plan, I do agree with your point there. Under consequences, we also list the financial impact as well, but I'm happy to really look at that description to make sure it is all encompassing, because I do agree that it's perhaps narrowed at the moment, just talking about the reputational side.
Yeah, I think I would concur with that point on the local plan. I think on the sustainability, we have had verbal updates from the executive member at I think at full council, but obviously that needs keeping an eye on. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. And that's, I've got a sort of a more systemic query. Go to page 35, which is how we are judging our likelihood. I'd asked some time ago actually about the last row on that and about its non-linearity, and I wondered whether there's any updates on that. And I really have a request really that we actually look at that for reassessment, so that we offer better granularity on the things that matter. Because if you look at that chart, you'll see the green, light green and yellow cover 50% of the range. And yet those are the ones that we're least interested in, because it's ticking along nicely. But we're only really going to be looking at the ones where things are going wrong, and that's non-linear and pushed towards the other end. So I just really would like if we could have a look at the way in which we are looking at that probability. And I also noticed in the scores when we note those, this might be my maths background, but we do them the wrong way round, so far as I'm doing. We do the y-axis first and then the x-axis, which gets a little bit confusing when you have SAPSA 4 as to which one's which. Is that normal? Just a general query.
I'm happy to take your point on board about the way the scores are done, Councillor. I'll change that moving forward, because that is a valid point. In terms of the likelihood, ultimately we picked this up as part of the risk policy review that we did. We went through audit. Ultimately, I understand where you're coming from, but I'm comfortable in terms of how we talk about the probability moving forward. Whilst we do talk about those percentages and stuff like that, we do also have the risk appetite statement, which talks about the demand and what we do in the event that it comes to those scores. So I'm satisfied that both those pieces together perhaps give a full reflection.
Any further comments or questions? The proposal is that the contents of the report are noted, and they are duly noted. So we now go on to item 9, which is a progress report on internal audit activity up to the 31st of January in relation to the completion of the annual internal audit plan for 21-22. Faye Hayward to present the report, which can be found on pages 37 to 61 of your agenda pack.
Thank you, Chairman. The next agenda items 9, 10, 11 and 12, you can stick with internal audit. So bear with me, we've got a few reports to go through. I hope my voice holds out. The first one.
Faye, could you move the microphone a bit closer?
Is that a bit better? Yeah, it's on.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first report of this agenda from us is the progress report on internal audit activity. You are fairly familiar with the layout of this particular report, and last time we came to the committee in 2021, we didn't have any results to highlight. The plan was significantly delayed. I'm pleased to report through this agenda item that now we have managed to finalise 5 assurance reports in this period. So if I take you straight to page 41 there, of your pack, you'll see the areas that we've been able to finalise. We've got accountancy services, which is substantial, income, again, substantial, HR and payroll, reasonable, COVID-19 business grants, reasonable, and contact centre, reasonable. There's no negative assurance gradings within this report to highlight to you. And as a result, 12 recommendations have been raised and agreed with management teams. At section 5 of this report, just going on page 41 into page 42, we talk a little bit about the delays in quarter 2 and quarter 3. We're now content that we're beginning to catch up, and we should see the remainder of the work completed by year end. So that's a positive point to note. And you can see our progress in Appendix 1, and that's developing all the time. Okay, so let's move on to Appendix 2 and the executive summary. So the first one here, accountancy services. There's no urgent or important recommendations. So I'm happy to take questions after I finish presenting the report. But if I may, I would like to focus on those that are reasonable and where we've raised important recommendations. So if we start at payroll and HR on page 13, we raised 2 important recommendations there. And the first relates to staff submitting VAT receipts with their expense claims for fuel costs. We found some, we would like to see that being the case for all. And then the second point relates to members. We noticed that the disclaimer when submitting expense claims did ask that there was a valid insurance certificate. We would like that to be expanded to say that there's a valid and current driver's license, tax if applicable, and current MOT. So they're the 2 points to raise from there that I would highlight to you. Moving on to COVID business grants, COVID-19 business grants, we had 4 important recommendations there. But I think it's just worth highlighting at this point that throughout 2020-21, £53.4 million equating to across 13 schemes and 14,000 applications were processed. So when we're talking about the gradings and the recommendations and the level of risk here, we just need to bear that in mind. The recommendations that we've raised do in fact just relate to 2 schemes, and we feel that some additional controls need to be carried out retrospectively. These 2 schemes relate to 22.5% of that overall total. So we would like to see, and management have agreed to, updating the application forms to include key information, making sure that evidence is retained as part of pre-payment checks, but also just strengthening the pre and post assurance plans and the risk assessments for both the additional restrictions grant and the restart grant. So it's a small proportion overall of what we're talking about in terms of improvement. But as I said, management are very happy to take on those recommendations and ensure that that is in place ahead of bees carrying out their sample checking of pre and post assurance checks. So overall, I think that is a positive point, that there's a few recommendations for improvement there. And then moving on to the contact centre audit, we raised 1 important recommendation, and that relates to obtaining customer feedback independently. So getting some surveys done just to make sure that that contact centre is operating and performing in line with resident expectations. So that's kind of a really quick run through of the key points and the important recommendations that I think we need to make you aware of. I'm more than happy to take your questions on any of the reports highlighted here. Thank you.
Thank you, Faye. On page 53, the 2 months from the date of journey, I think, wouldn't that be more practical as 2 months from the month end in which the journey occurred, because those are signed off on a monthly basis, and I think you're being a bit pedantic on the 2 months from the date of journey. But I do note that the change of wording as regards insurance, etc., has already been implemented. Thank you. Any further questions? Harry?
Just an observation or comment, really. I'm very pleased under COVID-19 that you haven't got anything in the last category, which is limited assurance. Hopefully we're over the worst of this and we won't be having the same sort of scale of grants and support. but obviously I think it might be something to revisit in terms of where those recommendations that you have made in that small area at a future date to ensure those have taken place. So I'm very pleased that this authority at least is has got a grip of the applications, reviewing things thoroughly. So I think we're to be commended for that. Thank you.
Just to add that those recommendations will be followed up as part of our follow-up process. If they do go over their deadline date agreed by management, they will come back to you as a committee so that you can see the reasons for the delay.
Councillor Burt.
Thank you, Chairman. I just have a slight observation really on the on page 53. You're talking about submitting VAT receipts. I'm likely unique in this, but I often don't have one, because if I'm putting fuel in the Land Rover, that could well be vegetable oil. Certainly the longest extent I've been between filling it up from a fuel filling station was 11 months. So just an observation that actually that might not be possible in all cases.
Yeah, I think there will be unique circumstances, certainly, but I think it's definitely something worth aiming for. And if we are clear about the exceptions, then that's a strengthening in that control area there. But thank you for that point. Yeah, we had noted that.
On page 59, the information bot appears when you access the planning service, but I do wonder what questions it can deal with in that environment. And I think it says elsewhere the bot only currently deals with 20% or gives 20% correct answers. Is there a target for improvement on that?
There is, Chair. Yes, I think we're aiming to get to 50% by this year. So I think this is a new area, and it's certainly something that we've picked up as a good practice point and identified this is an area that perhaps could be used across other district councils. I think, if it can take a few of the calls away from the contact centre, then it really is helping. But it clearly is new technology and it does need to be developed, and that will happen over time. It's artificial intelligence, so it'll get used to it and start bringing back some more useful answers, it's hoped.
Thank you. Any further questions from members? There are none. The recommendation is that members review the progress of the audit plan covered by the risk report, and that is duly noted. Thank you. We go on to item 10, which is the follow-up report on internal audit recommendations. That's on page 62 to 67 of your agenda. And again, Faye Hayward will present.
Thank you, Chair. Again, you're fairly familiar with the layout of this particular report. If there are any outstanding recommendations that have gone over their original agreed date, we bring them back to you with a reason as to why they've gone overdue. I'm really happy to report on page 67 that we do not have any urgent or important recommendations outstanding as of today. Senior management and responsible officers have been working really hard on the Pentana system to make sure that they're all closed in time. We do have a few needs attention priority recommendations that remain outstanding, and we will continue to monitor those, but we don't normally report those to the committee because they do represent a low risk to the council. Thank you.
Thank you. I think in the past where there has been a backlog, we have had that backlog spelled out in detail. So I think even when there's one or two, it's useful to know just what those outstanding ones are rather than just a number. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have that information for the most historical ones for 1819. Off the top of my head, I don't have the detail for the later one, but I can report that the housing needs and cybersecurity recommendations will again need to be extended. Now, the priority 3 needs attention recommendations do represent a nice to have, as it were. They aren't fundamental to the control framework in those areas. So for housing needs, it will be a review undertaken by the contract team for temporary housing. We didn't note any concerns, but we just felt that that was good practice to do that. It is in hand, but the department have requested a deadline until December this year to move that forward with the procurement team. And cybersecurity, this was around incident forensics. So there is a commitment to put this kind of process in place, but it does involve some upskilling of staff, and a policy and procedure really does need to be thought about. There's a new individual in post going forward as well, so we need that to give that time to embed. So we will see a delay on that. But as we do have those open, they are lower priority and there aren't that many of them. I can certainly bring an update to the next meeting if you would find that helpful, just to outline progress so we can continue to keep an eye on those.
Yes, I think a progress report for whichever next meeting you're coming to would be good. Any questions from members? David. David, could you move your microphone closer to you?
Sorry, yeah, is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah, just that those concerns go back to 2018, 19 and 19, 20 in particular, which seems a long time ago. It would be helpful to have a more detailed update on where those are up to.
I am more than happy to do that. I just want to stress that they are lower level priority recommendations. And normally we try to focus on those more urgent ones and important ones. But as we're now getting to the stage where we've almost got a full house, I can certainly see the sense in getting a bit more of an update on those, particularly the more historical ones.
David, for your information, we have in the past flexed muscle on these overdue ones with the threat that senior managers have to come in and explain themselves. So it is through this committee that we do apply pressure to getting those done. Thank you. Any more questions? The recommendation that members agree the content of the report. The report is duly noted. Thank you. We move on to item 11, which is the Strategic and Annual Internal Audit Plan 2022-23. The report is on pages 68 to 87 of the agenda pack. And Faye Haywood will again present, and there are some specific recommendations at the to be considered after the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we're nearly there. I'm nearly done. So this report comes to the committee annually and it sets out our plan of work from April onwards for the next year. And we've also put some work together to consider coverage for the next 3 years as well. So I'll just run you through the highlights of the report. We normally provide a charter for your approval and a strategy. The charter is approved every other year. You approved that last year, so it's not included as part of these papers. The internal audit strategy document has been updated for the year ahead and includes a little bit more detail about the internal team at South Norfolk Council expanding to provide a sort of succession method. So you may have met my internal audit trainee at previous meetings, Erica Voynich. So I have a bit more support in delivering the internal audit service, and the strategy just outlines that approach to learning and how we deliver our service from an internal audit perspective. It also goes into a little bit more detail about the procurement exercise that needs to be undertaken and concluded before the 1st of April when the contract runs out. But I think the main part of the report that you'll be particularly interested in starts from Appendix 2, and that's the Strategic Internal Audit Plan. Now, I've carried out meetings with all heads of service. I've discussed their risks. I've looked at the strategic risk register, the objectives, the delivery plans for the year ahead. And that work has resulted in this plan. So we sat down and considered the areas that we feel need looking at. Where we haven't looked at them this year, a justification and rationale has been provided in the column on the right-hand side. You may see some bright orange on that report there. That just represents areas where we're still waiting for the results of this year to be concluded. But yes, that just gives you a full picture of where we plan to provide internal audit coverage over the next 3 years. And then at Appendix 3, you're given the annual plan. So this is the number of days, the areas, and what we might look at in the notes section for the year ahead, 22-23. So I think, yeah, it's probably a bit long-winded to go through everyone separately. So if you did have any specific concerns or queries about the individual areas that we might be looking at for the year ahead, then please do ask. Thank you.
Thank you for that. On page 79, which concerns the housing or the change to environmental services subject to a white paper coming forward, you've booked that in for 24-25, but if that was brought forward early and required change before then, would you bring that forward in the programme?
Absolutely, Chair. So you can see that we've got a report waiting. We're still doing the audit testing at the moment, the results to come to the next meeting. So we've got that to consider, but that specific risk, we have the exact same meetings with all heads of service next year. If it's identified that we need to bring any of this forward or change it around, then we will do so at that point.
Okay, questions, Councillor Burt?
Thank you, Chairman. You're quite right about Appendix 2 being the one which your eye is drawn towards. So can I go to that on page 77, please? I was looking at the second one, GDPR data protection, and it's sort of coming back to what Mr. Fowler said earlier. It's been a long time since that one's been reviewed. So we're looking at 2018-19. And since that is such a high risk on our risk register, just, you know, clearly I can see that it's scheduled in for 22-23, but I'm wondering how you map the risk to the frequency of review.
The exact same process was followed last year. So the only thing I can think that may have happened is that particular score wasn't as high last year and it's increased on the risk register. So that's why it's kind of been added in this year. We've still had some outstanding audit recommendations that the team have been working through as well. So we have been keeping an eye on that area. But yes, I suspect the threat has increased and therefore as a result, we've added it in.
Thank you for that. On page 80, there's reference to private sector housing and HMOs. A few of us received a training session on this very subject yesterday evening. And there is also the recent white paper on levelling up suggests that private sector housing will be required to meet the decent homes standard. However, the decent homes standard is currently subject to review. So there will be a timetabling to be addressed there, but we don't know what that is yet. And just to note that on page 85, health and safety, this authority has recently reinstated the General Purposes Committee, and health and safety matters now come as part of the brief for that committee. Thank you. Any further comments or questions? Okay, the recommendation is that the committee notes and approves the internal audit strategy for 2022-23. B, the strategic internal audit plan for 2022-23 through to 25-26. And C, the annual audit plan 22-23. I have a proposer and a seconder, please. Proposed, Councillor James, seconder, Councillor Harry Clark. Thank you. All in favour? Duly carried. We move now on to item 12, which is a verbal discussion on the self-assessment of what a good committee we are. So if we can go to page 88, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I merely facilitate this process and provide you with an update report at the next meeting with the results of this discussion. I think it's worth pointing out that we carry out this annually, and the committee is also, has always viewed itself, and I agree with that, that there are strong controls in place, there's good practice being followed throughout the terms of reference and the conduct of the committee. So really this verbal discussion and providing Appendix 1 from page 88 is just to see whether there are any changes that need to be made, any updates, to let me know, and then I can go away and pull the report together and bring it to the next meeting.
Thank you, Faye. I would draw attention to item 7 on value for money and best value. My comment is the external audit no longer required to express a view on this subject. So my question of you and of ourselves really is, does this need to be a bit of future work in determining how this authority measures its own value for money?
Sorry, thank you, Chair. I'll just hand over to Annie for that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, so whilst the value for money opinion is no longer the same from our external auditors, they do still report to us as part of the accounts on value for money. So I think you can still place reliance on that. They report under 3 specific criteria still: financial sustainability, governance, and improving economy, efficiency and effectiveness. So whilst it's slightly different, it really still does the same work. So you will still get an annual report from Ernst & Young as part of the accounts on that.
I mean, I think politically that it goes with the headline figures of what your Band D council tax is, and I don't know how you relate what audit looks at with what the general public looks at, but perhaps you'd like to think about them. Any more questions? Linda.
Just a small comment. It's lovely to see a complete line of ticks under yes. I hope we all really do justify that. The only query, and I've raised this one before, is why we've got a tick in the very top box, which is next to the title, Audit Committee Purpose and Governance. That rather gives the impression that somebody just ticked it all and didn't look to see what they said. But I'm very pleased that all the others are ticked.
This is guidance for a self-assessment. So the question really is, would you as a committee member tick all the boxes? Faye.
Sorry, I will absolutely remove that tick. However, just considering the next Appendix 1, you've got 4s in there, and I'm just wondering whether actually you feel that the committee has a particular strength in any of those sections where we could perhaps show a 5. That would be my only observation from this process, because as I said at the start, I do feel that the committee is very strong and it operates very well. So it just seems a shame for you to miss out on the top score. Certainly for some areas, I would expect you to be at that 5 level there.
I think I'd agree that this committee works jolly hard, and perhaps we should have given ourselves a 5, but can we change it?
Would members like to just go through the boxes in the appendix and just agree one by one the 4 ratings or otherwise? First one is promoting the principles of good governance and their application to decision making. Are we a 4 or a 5? Nobody wishes to express a view on that one. Linda. A non-voting member disagrees. So I've got to have a vote for 5s, please. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right, we're going for 5. Contributing to the development of an effective control environment. Well, I guess we contribute, but we're not the main movers in that area. That's really down to the management side of things. So I think personally a 4 is adequate. David?
That was going to be my question, Chair, but you answered it previously, that you have, I guess, at times brought senior managers to this committee. If that's the case, then it appears it's either a 4 or a 5, I would have thought.
My own view on that one is it's a 4 with the potential of being a 5 when we flex our muscles. But we haven't had to do that in the last few meetings. So the next one is supporting the establishment of arrangements for the governance of risk and the effective management of risks. Well, I do think this committee does discuss in some detail, what's on the risk register, and we do ask good questions about how it's being addressed. So I'd certainly go for 4.5 on that, but if anyone would like to tick us, put a 5 on there. Yes, one. Right, we'll go for a 5 on that one. And the final one, advising on the adequacy of the assurance framework. We've got a 4, and that is partially a specialized function. So we're happy to stay with a 4 on that. Yeah, okay, so I think that concludes that. There's no particular recommendation. All right, it's sorry, didn't want to flip over. All right. Sorry, supporting the quality of internal audit activity, particularly by underpinning its organizational independence. I'd probably go for 5 on that. Yeah. Aiding the achievement of the authority's goals and objectives through helping to ensure appropriate governance, risk control, and assurance arrangements. I personally leave that as a 4. Supporting development of robust arrangements for ensuring value for money. I'll leave that as a 4, but with the potential we might improve on that in the future, and helping the authority to implement the values of good governance, including effective arrangements for countering fraud and corruption risks. Well, that's currently a 4, and once we've approved the new policies today, that might be a 5. Everyone happy with that? Good. So we now move on to item 13, which is accounting policies for 2021-22. Alison Chubbuck to present, and it's on pages 93 to 105 of your agenda pack.
Thank you, Chairman. This is the annual report which we bring to you for our accounting policies in readiness for when you review the statement of accounts in June. I'm very sorry, there's very little change this year. In accounting terms, it's a fairly dull year. There's no accounting changes to standards or anything. So essentially, these policies are exactly the same as last year, with just changes to the year dates and things like that. There are some areas in there which are still highlighted yellow, which you get each year, where we await our valuer's report on the useful lives of our assets. So those will be updated based on their professional opinion. As we highlight each year, there is potential for these to change ever so slightly when we bring them back in June. And if that happened, we would report to you in June. But the only reason that would really happen is if one of our advisors were to suggest on areas such as bad debt provision or on valuations that there needs to be a change. So it wouldn't change the fundamental policies that you see before you today. The only area I can think of potentially this year that may change is on the appeals provision for business rates. We get an update after the end of March from our advisors on that. And at the moment, we base it on 3% of our net rates. If they were to advise that needed to change, then we would make that change and report to you. But otherwise, I'm afraid much the same as last year, but I'll happily take any questions.
Thank you, Alison. I just have one question which might be technical. on page 100, investment property, I think the suggestion is the facilities embedded in the PFI are depreciated at 2% per annum over 33.5 years. My reading of that is at the end of the period, they're worth a third of what we put them into the PFI at. And the question is the land value recorded separately?
Yes, the land and buildings are recorded separately for all our assets, because obviously the land isn't depreciated as it has an endless life as such.
So did the land, did that get put into the PFI and gets taken out at the end at the same value, or does it stay ours and not part of the PFI?
The strange thing with PFI is, although it's within a PFI, it still sits on our balance sheet. So it never, the buildings and the land never come away and come back. They actually remain with us the whole time. So it's a strange rules of PFI. So it hasn't gone out and come back. It remains on our balance sheet the whole time.
Right, any more questions on the policies for the following year? See none. So we are asked that this committee review and agree the accounting policies at Appendix A. All in favour? So unanimous, thank you. So item 14 is actually 3 separate policies, one concerning counter fraud, corruption and bribery. One concerns whistleblowing and one concerns money laundering. Alison Chubbott to present, and those policies are held within pages 106 to 149 of the agenda pack.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, thank you. Yes, we bring these for an update fully to yourselves every 3 years because it is an audit committee delegation to approve all of these policies. We bring them together because they are linked. In the interim, we update them for small changes such as staff names and things like that. But this year we've taken a fundamental review of them, cross-referenced them, updated them for good practice and all of those types of changes which you would expect. The thing that I'm always asked at this committee is how well they've worked, and it's always very, very hard to judge that because a lot of the reasons for having these in place are to aid prevention and rather than update after the event. But because it's been a sort of unusual couple of years, we have had these policies on whistleblowing used a little bit more than normal. Certainly when the COVID grants were in place, we did have members of the public contact us under the whistleblowing policy. Mainly though, I'm afraid they actually related to the furlough scheme. So we just had to pass them signpost them to the HMRC site. We did have one fraud reported to us under the grant scheme, and we passed that to ARP fraud to investigate, and it was deemed not fraudulent. And then subsequently, that was actually the one that was reported to an external audit, which you might remember that came through the accounts. And again, Ernst & Young determined that there was not fraudulent activity there. The money laundering is mainly that policy is used by ARP mostly, particularly the enforcement agents. If they are offered large sums of cash to pay off debts, they would report that through the money laundering policy. And the other big area which could be impacted is on business rates. If businesses are due refunds and they try and give different bank accounts, that type of thing. So ARP have regular training on that for the different policies for all the 5 partners. The other thing that we've noticed on these policies is actually they're not particularly modern in terms of reporting. No one fills out a Word document and emails it anymore. It really ought to be an online form. So if these are approved by yourselves today, we'll go away and work with the digital team to set up online forms to make it easier for people to send through their any whistleblowing concerns and that type of thing, and those would be confidentially emailed to the relevant people in the policy, just to try and improve that a bit more. But yeah, very happy to take any questions again.
David.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of points. On page 122, where you're identifying that complaints from members of the public about services should be dealt with through the council's complaints procedure. Public might not readily distinguish between what is a complaint about a service and what might be a more serious whistleblowing concern. And it might be an idea on the council's website on the complaints procedure to have a link to the whistleblowing policy or to identify that distinction. Because it could be inappropriate for members of the public to make a complaint through the complaints procedure, which actually ought to be dealt with through whistleblowing. So,
I think your point is well made, and you'll get a response.
The second point, Chair, which is on page 123, where you say that the concerns in certain instances should be reported to Ernst & Young. Ernst & Young's contact details aren't contained in the Appendix 1.
Alison.
Yeah, thank you for that. Both of those, yeah, we can certainly put a link and some examples just to try and help people. That's a good idea. And yes, apologies, I'll add the contact details of Ernst & Young on there as well.
I've got a couple of questions. Page 115 on implementation. What evidence does this committee have that service managers are making sure all staff are familiar with the policy?
Yes, it's a good question, because there's no point in having these unless people are aware of them and use them. So as part of once these are approved, we'll publicise that they're there, but we also, as part of our training on finance to all service managers and CMT, we include that information to highlight it to them as part of their sort of financial training. So I can't provide you evidence today on that, but what I can do is bring that forward to you in future if that would help.
Thank you. I think my other comment is how to raise a concern. You've got sort of listed the contact one of the following, but with no guidance as to who the most appropriate person to contact is.
Yeah, I think that will be helped by the online form, because then people don't have to choose who to send it to. It will automatically come to the right person. We'll have to think about that, because obviously if a complaint, for example, is about the Section 151 officer, it doesn't want to come whizzing across to me. So we'll have to make sure the form works properly. But yes, that should help.
Harry.
Thank you, Alison. Just a brief question. It's commended on what you put down there, and I've worked a lot in the past in devising like PCAW policies, now called Protect. When you're reporting any data or cases, which obviously will be very, very small, and some things may need for purpose of investigation to be kept below the line at some point, would you break anything down where, for example, we had cases where that we were made aware of because they had been raised externally rather than raised, say, for example, internally, as taking out the point that David Fuller made, where someone might raise something because they see something on the website with us, or they might raise it externally. In other words, the route by, it might be useful to have the route by which a particular problem was or concern was identified. I'm really thinking in terms of where somebody might think, despite all our assurances, they wanted to raise something externally because they didn't necessarily have confidence, which might be entirely misplaced, about the council's own policies. It could be very rare, but I'm just sort of throwing it in the mix. Thank you.
Yes, that's that's really where internal audit and external audit would come into that. So yes, if that were the case, there's other avenues for people to use. So yeah, we'll make sure that's clear.
Councillor Burt.
Thank you, Chairman. So I'm noting throughout these documents that there's an emphasis on financial fraud, and I'm certainly pleased that we are treating that with the necessary importance and not ignoring it, as was mentioned in the House of Commons recently. However, I'm slightly worried that we could, if we're not careful, miss some other elements in here. There's not, perhaps if I can group them under something like democratic fraud, I'm making that term up myself, where there's a sort of a failure to consult or a failure to follow correct decision-making process or disclose information. And that seems to be sort of missing from within the realms of these reports. And can I specifically come on to page 129, where you've got the guidance document there, and the first bullet point says, this is to help people about inappropriate behaviour. Any criminal offence, particularly fraud or corruption. Now, I wonder when we start to put in this emphasis of fraud and corruption, we might downplay some extremely significant reasons for wanting to whistleblow. I mean, look, child abuse. I mean, if we had that, we don't want to be downplaying. That's if anything, more important. So I'm just wondering about the emphasis and whether we need to broaden that a bit.
Alison?
Yeah, so sorry, I'm answering these in the wrong order. So something like there's a safeguarding policy as well. So we would need to make sure that people were reporting in the right area. We wouldn't want them using whistleblowing necessarily for safeguarding, but if they did, we'd obviously make sure it made its way to the safeguarding. In terms of, I mean, there is a grey line between what's a complaint and what is whistleblowing. And I think we work together internally enough to know that if something came in through the wrong strategy, we would put it to the correct place. I mean, we do list examples of fraud, which include, you know, selling off equipment, abuse of position and that type of thing. So we do try and give examples, but there'll always be examples that we haven't given. And something like failure to consult, I think that's more of a governance type of issue than a whistleblowing type of issue. So again, it's about making sure that anything that comes through these policies are directed to the correct place if they're not necessarily deemed as whistleblowing or something. But we certainly wouldn't ignore anything. We'd make sure it went to the right place.
You happy with that, Tim?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. On page 133, how the council will respond, is it the intention that the General Purposes Committee will now have the primary responsibility of overseeing investigation? And if so, does the policy wording reflect that?
The Governance and Audit Committee has full responsibility for all of these areas. So that's not something that I had considered going through to general purposes. If that's something that the committees wish to consider, then I can take that up with Democratic Services.
Okay. I think it's the wording the council will. I think it should clarify. I mean, if it says the council will, through its audit and governance committee, ensure, it demonstrates what the pathway is. I'm not sure that has been included in the future remit of the General Purposes Committee, and I'm more than happy for it to stay here. But I think the policy should demonstrate, you know, how it will be dealt with. Thank you. Any further comments? There are none. I would like, therefore, a proposer and then a seconder for adopting these recommendations on block one, that the counter fraud, corruption, bribery policy be approved. 2, that the whistleblowing policy be approved, and 3, that the money laundering policy be approved. I have Kay Gray as a proposer and Jane James as a seconder. All in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. Item 15 is the work programme, and I did ask for that to be related as regards future meetings. So we have the sort of the statutory deadlines that are in there that we have to respond to. We've got a couple of to be confirmed. I don't know that Julie or anyone can advise if there's any problems with timetabling those.
Thank you, Chairman. I think as far as I know, the standards review code of conduct is coming back sometime next year, before the elections, before the.
Are there any other matters? Sorry. Okay.
I know you're probably sick of me after today, but the 23rd of June, there's nothing from internal audit. So hopefully
Are
you
you
would be
volunteering?
I am duty bound to provide you with a few reports there. The progress report, follow-up report, and the year-end opinion. So sorry, another 3 from me next time.
Okay, you liaise with committee services on that one then, right? Any further comments? Is that right? Are there any matters that members of the committee would like to see investigated or discussed that are not in this programme? No. Okay, so subject to that, that's a reported addition. You have to approve the forward work programme. Thank you. So the next meeting that is scheduled for Thursday, the 23rd of June at 10 AM in this room. And I'd like to thank everyone for attending this meeting and those watching